Why does God test us? Did you notice Jesus isn't tempted by just the devil? It's the Spirit of God who leads Jesus into the desert so that he can be tempted by the devil. Tested is really a better translation than tempted. But even so, why would God want to test Jesus? After 40 days, apparently without food, Jesus is hungry. Probably a bit hangry, really. Wouldn't a Snickers be great right about now? And along comes the tempter, the tester, to suggest he turn the stones into bread. That seems like a harmless enough magic trick, but Jesus remembers why he's there, to gain strength and focus. And he takes the opportunity to make the situation about reliance on God. By quoting Scripture and challenging the tempter, Jesus sort of turns this into a test of the tester. So the tester pulls out some Scripture and suggests Jesus throw himself off the high place of the temple and let God catch him. Jesus retorts with another Scripture passage, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Jesus remembers this is not about testing God, but about being tested himself. So he refuses to make whimsical, selfish demands of God. So finally, the tester puts out his biggest challenge: worship me and the world is yours. The world would be his, maybe, but is it really the devil's to give? The world would be his, but would he have God? Jesus chooses God over the world. He chooses to serve God rather than himself. Notice, too, that part of the first two challenges is the provocation, if you are the Son of God. But Jesus refuses to prove himself to the devil. He keeps his focus on God, choosing God, turning to God, relying on God rather than himself or the devil. He responds to God's call, as our Newman theme for the month would put it. Responds to God's call. Why does God test Jesus? To strengthen and encourage him? Not to set him up for judgment? Why are the man and the woman in the garden tested? It doesn't seem to be God's Spirit behind this testing. But God doesn't stop the serpent, the most cunning of all the animals. Is God the one who made the serpent cunning? So God doesn't stop the serpent. The woman listens to the serpent's logical presentation, wanting to forget the voice of her Creator. She takes the fruit and eats. And she gives it to her husband, who also eats. And when God comes to them, the woman blames the serpent, and the man blames the woman. Not only do they fail the test of obedience and trust, but also they fail the test of truth and responsibility. Why are they tested? To strengthen and encourage them, not to set them up for judgment. Why are we tested? I hope some of you squirmed when I first asked that and squirm again. I don't believe God actually tests us, let alone tempts us. But life does bring us lots of challenges, doesn't it? And God doesn't seem to stop them, at least not always. Students are still crawling out of midterm season, nursing their wounded pride and weary bodies. And now they have to look to the final test. It's not really the final test, is it? All of us are tested, challenged by life, by work, relationships, temptations, self-knowledge. All of us are tested, giving us the chance to turn to God rather than to ourselves. Giving us a chance to respond to God's call to freedom. Why does God allow us to be challenged, whether by life's vicissitudes or by our own doing? Is it so that we can find deeper life by more deeply relying on God? Life tests us, but during Lent, we test ourselves. Again, not to set ourselves up for judgment, but to gain strength and resolve, and most importantly, to gain in trust in God. For the only way we can meet the challenges of Lent is to rely on God. That's really the only test of Lent, to turn to God. We're meant to struggle with, even fail, our Lenten challenges so that we'll turn again and again and again to God. Our threefold Lenten discipline of prayer, fasting, and charity can even mirror the threefold test Jesus faced in the wilderness. We commit ourselves firstly to prayer, but sometimes find it unrewarding, even challenging, or frightening. Do we, with the grace of God, stick with it? Stick with prayer? Our fasting becomes difficult or an occasion of pride. Do we, with the grace of God, recommit ourselves to the deeper reasons for fasting, to stand with the hungry, and to rediscover our hunger for God? Our almsgiving or charity can subtly, almost unconsciously, become a way of trying to gain points with God. Do we, with the grace of God, instead practice reliance on God's free gift of love? The story of the first man and woman is about self-reliance. But through our baptism, Jesus in the desert and in his life and death and resurrection heals us of that self-reliance. We turn only and fully to God. As St. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, if by the transgression of the one death came to reign, how much more will those who receive the abundance of grace come to reign in life through the one Jesus Christ? Or, as we'll sing at the Easter Vigil, standing in the light of the great candle, "O happy fault that earned so great, so glorious a Redeemer." So bring on the tests so that we can renew the strength of our faith. Bring on the failure of the tests so that we can renew our reliance on God. Bring on Lent so that we can stand ready for the joys of Easter and its tests.